When people talk about family, they always say blood is thicker than water. But I learned the hard way. Blood can choke you just as easily as it can bind you. I was 27 when my father threw me out. It was a Wednesday evening in late August, the Colorado air already cold enough to sting. The argument started the same way most of ours did. Over something small that became something cruel. He stood in the living room of our home in Centennial, his voice booming, "If you can't follow my rules, Alice, you can pack your bags." I thought he was bluffing. He wasn't. My dad, Richard Carter, was the kind of man who believed control was love. After my mom died 6 years earlier, he became impossible to please. Every choice I made was wrong. My job wasn't good enough. My clothes weren't proper. My boyfriend, the one I loved so much, wasn't stable enough. He didn't see me as a daughter anymore. I was just another responsibility he never asked for. When I told him I wanted to move to Denver to start an interior design business, he laughed. Not a light laugh, a bitter, mocking one. You? You can't even pay your own health insurance, and you want to be some designer? I stood there frozen, clutching the folder that held my business sketches. All I wanted was a small seed of encouragement. But he crushed it before it could grow. I don't know what possessed me to shout back that night, but I did. "I'm not staying here just to make you feel powerful, Dad." His eyes went cold. He pointed toward the door. "Then don't. Get out," and just like that, I was no longer his daughter. I was a tenant overstaying her welcome. I remember the way the porch light glowed behind me as I walked to my car, tears freezing on my cheeks. The neighborhood was quiet, the sound of sprinklers ticking in the distance. I sat in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel, too numb to even start the engine. That night, I drove until the highway lights blurred into gold ribbons. I ended up in Aurora, parked in the back lot of a 24-hour Walmart. I reclined the seat, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "What now?" No one answered. The next morning, I showered in a Lockwood Fitness restroom, using baby wipes and dry shampoo. I went to work at my receptionist job pretending nothing was wrong. No one noticed my swollen eyes or the faint smell of car air freshener clinging to my clothes. By night, I picked up extra shifts at a Jamie's Diner off Colfax Avenue. I told myself it was temporary, but as weeks turned into months, the parking lot became home. I watched couples eat pancakes under warm lights, families laugh over burgers, and I wondered if anyone there knew what it felt like to have nowhere to go. One night, around 1 a.m., I saw a little girl asleep in a booth. While her mom finished her meal, she looked so peaceful, like I used to when Mom was alive. The sight hit me so hard I had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I cried quietly against the stall door. That's when I realized I couldn't let this be my story. I started saving every dollar I could. I cut my meals down to one a day, canceled everything that wasn't gas or work. And one night during my break, I reopened my sketchbook. The same one my dad said was a waste of time. The pages were wrinkled, but my hands remembered. I started sketching living rooms, kitchens, and spaces that felt like hope. A few weeks later, a coworker, Leah, peeked over my shoulder and said, "You should post these online." I hesitated. "No one cares about stuff like this," she smiled. "You'd be surprised." That night, I made an Instagram page called Haven and Hue Interiors and Designs. I uploaded 3 photos of my sketches and logged off. I didn't expect anything, but the next morning there were 13 likes and 1 comment. "Do you take commissions?" That small comment was enough to wake something in me. I took a deep breath and replied, "Yes," even though I had no idea how I'd do it. Over the next few weeks, I took small gigs. Color palette consultations, digital mock-ups, virtual layouts. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt proud of myself. One night, I drove past my dad's house. The lights were on. Through the window, I could see him sitting in his recliner, TV flashing across his face. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he missed me at all. But then I realized it didn't matter. He took my home from me, but he couldn't take my will. And that realization, that tiny, trembling seed of strength, was the moment my revenge began. Not loud, not cruel, but quiet, patient, beautiful. Because one day, he would have to see what I built from the ashes he left me in. I used to think success was loud, the kind that came with applause, fancy cars, classy dress, or a shiny title on a glass office door. But when it finally came to me, it was quiet. So quiet that it sounded like my own heartbeat. Months after launching Haven and Hue Interiors and Designs, I was still working the night shift at Jamie's, designing rooms on my phone during breaks. My only office was the back seat of my Honda Civic, parked under a dim streetlight. But one morning, everything changed. A local realtor from Littleton, Colorado, named Claudia Smith, messaged me on Instagram. "Hey Alice, I love your design style. I have a listing that needs staging on a tight budget. Are you interested?" I stared at the message for 5 full minutes before replying. Yes, absolutely yes. I didn't have a business license. I didn't have equipment. I didn't even own proper tools. But I had vision, and that was enough. The house was a modest 3-bedroom on Wadsworth Boulevard, owned by an older couple moving to Arizona. Claudia's budget was $700, barely enough to cover furniture, paint, and decor. So, I did what I always did best. I improvised. I spent 2 days hunting through Facebook Marketplace, Instagram, and Goodwill stores. I sanded down old tables, spray-painted lamps, and borrowed Leah's vacuum cleaner to clean the carpets. When I finally finished, the place looked like a completely different home, warm, modern, and filled with light. I didn't have a team, I didn't have a truck. It was just me, my Civic, and a stubborn will to make something beautiful out of nothing. 3 days later, Claudia called me. "Alice, you won't believe it. The house sold an over-asking price. You did this." I dropped the phone and cried in my car. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Claudia posted photos of the house online, tagging my page. Within a week, I had 6 new inquiries. That was the start of everything. By the end of the year, I had staged 11 homes, each one better than the last. I quit Jamie's, left my receptionist job, and started working full-time as a freelance designer. Leah, my best friend and roommate, would watch me stay up until 4 a.m. editing photos for my portfolio. She'd tease, "You know normal people sleep, right?" And I'd laugh and say, "Sleep is for people who already made it." I lived off caffeine, hope, and raw determination. In February, I officially registered Haven and Hue Interiors and Designs, LLC. I signed the paperwork at a small office on Broadway Street in Denver, hands shaking as I held the pen. That night, I took myself out for dinner, alone, at a quiet diner. I ordered pancakes, just like the ones I used to serve at Jamie's. It felt poetic somehow. I toasted to my reflection in the window and whispered, "You did it." My business started to grow faster than I expected. Within 6 months, I was collaborating with small developers and boutique hotels across Colorado Springs and Boulder. One afternoon, I got a call from a client who said, "I saw your work at the Holloway property. You have such a distinct style, very warm and authentic. My wife wants to meet you." That phrase, authentic, stuck with me because authenticity was something I lost the moment my father threw me out. Now, I was building it again, one home at a time. And then one day, I got a text from my brother, Ethan. "Dad saw one of your designs on Facebook. He didn't know it was yours until he saw your name at the bottom." I froze. For a moment, I imagined his face, that same disbelief he had when I told him I wanted to design. Ethan added, "He didn't say much, just looked quiet. That word tasted sweeter than any apology he could have offered. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted him to see what he'd thrown away. By summer, I finally moved out of Leah's apartment and rented my own loft in Rhino District, New Jersey. Exposed brick, high ceilings, sunlight streaming through tall windows. It felt like a space that belonged to the woman I'd become. I bought secondhand furniture, hung up my sketches, and placed a single photo of my mom on the shelf by the window. She looked so proud in that picture, like she already knew I'd find my way. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and whispered to her, "I made it, Mom. I really did." It wasn't revenge yet, not fully, but it was peace. And peace, I realized, is the most powerful form of revenge there is. One Friday morning, Claudia called again. "Emily, I have a big opportunity for you." A luxury development near Boulder. They need a full design consultant. It's a 6-month contract, and the pay is good. How good? I asked. When she said the number, I nearly dropped my coffee. It was more than I'd made in the entire previous year. That job changed my life. I designed luxury model homes, hired a small team, and started being featured in local design magazines. One day, a writer from 5280 magazine called me for an interview. "Your story is inspiring," she said. "From sleeping in your car to becoming one of Denver's most promising designers. People will want to hear this." And for the first time, I told my story, not with shame, but with pride. When the article came out, my phone exploded with messages. Old coworkers, classmates, even Ethan. But the one message that stood out came late at night. A number I hadn't saved in years. "Dad." I read the article. "You've done well for yourself, Emily. I'm proud of you." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply, to forgive him. But then I remembered the night he turned his back while I cried on the porch. The silence that followed when I needed him most. So I put my phone down, turned off the light, and whispered to myself, "You should have been proud of me when it mattered." The first time I saw my father again was 4 years after the night he threw me out. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even supposed to happen. It was a gray Tuesday in November, the kind of day that makes Denver feel like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I was meeting a client, a property investor named Mr. Donovan, at a new construction site in Highlands Ranch. When I arrived, hard hats gleamed in the cold light. Workers carried lumber, and the air smelled like dust and pine. As I got out of my car, I saw him, standing near the contractor's truck, clipboard in hand, older, heavier, and wearing the same stubborn look I remembered. My father. For a second, my mind went blank. I thought maybe I was imagining him. But when he turned, his eyes met mine. And all the years between us collapsed into silence. He looked just as shocked as I felt. His lips parted, but no words came out. The color drained from his face. Mr. Donovan, oblivious, smiled and said, "Emily, this is Richard Carter, our senior electrical consultant. He'll handle the wiring for your design specs." My stomach dropped. Of course. The universe wasn't done with me yet. For weeks we worked on the same project, exchanging stiff nods, short emails, and pretending not to share a past. I stayed professional. My designs were sleek, modern, elegant. His work was still meticulous, but there was something tired in his movements, like life had worn him down. One afternoon during a site meeting, I heard him coughing near the stairwell. It was a deep, harsh sound that made me glance over. He waved me off when I tried to ask if he was okay. "I'm fine," he muttered, voice gravelly, but I knew that tone. It wasn't fine. Later that day, Claudia called me privately. "Did you know your dad's been having financial trouble? He lost the old house. Foreclosure." My heart sank. The same house he threw me out of, gone. I didn't feel satisfaction, not at first, just disbelief. The man who'd once lectured me about stability had lost everything. The cracks in the armor. As weeks went on, I learned more from whispers than from him. He'd retired early, invested in a failed construction startup, and racked up debt. Ethan had moved out of state. He was alone now, and yet, he never once tried to talk about it with me. One evening, I stayed late at the site, finalizing lighting fixtures. The sky outside was dimming when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use one," he said quietly. I took it hesitantly. "Thanks." We stood there in awkward silence, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "You've done well for yourself, Alice." His voice cracked on my name. I wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in my throat. "I read about you," he continued. "Your business. The article in 5280 magazine. Your mom would have been proud." My chest tightened. "You don't get to use her memory like that," I whispered. He blinked, pained. "You're right." We stood there, both pretending the smell of sawdust was more interesting than the ghost between us. Then he said something I never expected. "I shouldn't have thrown you out." I was angry, scared. "You reminded me of your mom, so full of dreams that I didn't know how to protect." The tears burned behind my eyes before I could stop them. I didn't need protection, Dad, I said softly. I just needed you to believe in me. He looked down, shame etched in every line on his face. I know. 3 weeks later, the project finished. It was the most beautiful design I'd ever done. A modern farmhouse with white oak floors, high ceilings, and golden sunlight that poured through every window. The day we wrapped, my father came to see it one last time. He stood in the living room, running his fingers along the banister I'd designed, eyes glistening. It's beautiful, he said quietly. You're everything I hoped you'd be. I didn't know how to respond. The little girl in me wanted to forgive him instantly, but the woman I'd become needed more than words, so I said, You taught me how to survive, Dad, even if you didn't mean to. He nodded slowly, like he understood that was the closest thing to forgiveness he'd get right now. A month later, I got a call from Ethan. Alice, Dad's in the hospital. My chest went cold. He'd collapsed at a job site, heart failure. When I arrived at Denver Health, he was asleep, frail, pale, with wires and monitors surrounding him. Seeing him like that shattered me in ways I can't explain. When he woke, he smiled faintly. Didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't, I whispered. He reached for my hand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see you now. You made it, I squeezed his hand, not out of pity, but peace. I know, I said. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered, I'm sorry. That was the last thing he ever said to me. The funeral was small. Just me, Ethan, and a few of Dad's old coworkers. It was snowing lightly over the Fairmount Cemetery, the wind carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. When they lowered the casket, I felt a strange calm. Not relief, not grief. Just the closing of a very long, painful chapter. Afterward, Ethan and I stood by the car in silence. He really did love you, you know, Ethan said. I nodded. Maybe he did. But love without kindness isn't love. That night, I returned home to my apartment. The skyline glowed outside my window, Denver lights stretching endlessly across the dark. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the floor, and whispered to myself, I won't let his mistakes define me anymore. I opened my laptop and began sketching again. But this time, I wasn't drawing someone else's home. I was designing my own. A place filled with light, warmth, and peace. Because revenge, I realized, doesn't always come from destruction. Sometimes it comes from building a life so beautiful that the people who doubted you can't help but feel the weight of what they lost. It's been 3 years since my father's funeral. Sometimes it still feels strange to say that, like my mind hasn't caught up to the fact that he's gone. But time, I've learned, doesn't erase pain. It just changes the way it echoes. After he passed, I took a month off from work. I turned off my phone, stopped taking clients, and stayed in my Denver loft, surrounded by sketches and silence. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent years running, from him, from the past, from that version of me who slept in her car. Now there was nowhere left to run. One evening, I found an old box buried in my closet. Inside were photos from my childhood. My mom in her gardening hat, me holding a paintbrush at age 7, and one of my dad teaching me how to ride a bike. He looked so different in that picture. Younger, softer, still capable of love. I sat there on the floor, holding that photo, and whispered, I forgive you, Dad. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. I was tired of carrying the weight of his mistakes on my shoulders. A few months later, I opened my own design studio downtown, Haven and Hue Interiors HQ. A renovated brick building filled with sunlight, plants, and walls, painted in soft earth tones. The grand opening was small but beautiful. Leah was there, grinning ear to ear. Look at you now, she said, hugging me tight. From sleeping in a car to owning a studio. You're unstoppable, I smiled. Guess revenge looks good in natural lighting. We laughed. But deep down, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. A few weeks after opening the studio, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Ethan. Inside was an old folded note written in my father's handwriting. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. Alice, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted to. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you. But I want you to know that every time I see something beautiful, a painting, a home, a sunset, I think of you. You got that from your mother. She saw light in everything. I just didn't know how to protect it. I hope one day you'll find peace, not for me, but for yourself. Love, Dad. I read that letter a dozen times, tears streaming down my face. It didn't erase what happened, but it made me realize something. Sometimes, the people who hurt us aren't villains. They're just broken in ways we can't fix. That fall, I got an email from the Denver Youth Shelter asking if I'd be interested in partnering on a community project, redesigning temporary housing for homeless young women. The moment I read it, I felt chills. I thought back to the nights I slept in my Civic, clutching a blanket, pretending not to cry. If I could help even one girl avoid that pain, it would all be worth it. So, I said yes. The project became my passion. I spent months redesigning the shelter, turning it from a cold, gray space into a place of safety and hope. Soft lighting, bright murals, warm colors, cozy corners. When the project was unveiled, one of the girls, maybe Atern, with tired eyes and trembling hands, came up to me and said, "I didn't think people cared about girls like us." I hugged her and whispered, "We care. I care, because I've been where you are." Her eyes widened. "You?" I nodded. "Me." That moment healed something in me that years of success never could. Months later, Haven and Hue Interiors received the Denver Humanitarian Design Award for that project. The ceremony was held in a glass ballroom overlooking the city skyline. As I stepped onto the stage, lights beaming down, I thought about how far I'd come. From a car in a parking lot to standing here in front of hundreds of people applauding. When it was time to speak, I took a deep breath and said, 5 years ago, I lost everything, my home, my family, my sense of direction. But sometimes losing everything gives you the chance to rebuild yourself from scratch. My father once told me that dreams don't pay bills. And maybe he was right, but they do something more important. They build hope, and hope can change everything. The room fell silent. Then applause filled the air. That night, I drove home through the glowing Denver streets. The city lights reflected on the windshield, soft and golden. I rolled the windows down, letting the cold air hit my face. At a red light, I looked up and realized I was near Wadsworth Boulevard, not far from the first house I ever staged. The same place where my story really began. I parked for a moment, stepped out, and stared at the house. A family lived there now, laughter spilling from the windows. And I smiled, because that's what I'd always wanted to create. Homes filled with warmth and love, not for revenge, not for proof, but because that's who I am. Sometimes I still think about my father. I wonder if he'd be proud of the woman I became. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But now it doesn't matter, because I finally understand what he never did. Strength doesn't come from control. It comes from compassion, even toward yourself. I built my revenge out of kindness, my empire out of pain, and my peace out of forgiveness. And every time I open the door to my studio, I whisper the same words. A small promise to the girl I used to be. You made it home.